Cool, then I'm hallucinating.
Well, that'll make for an interesting podcast.
Yeah, the umlauts do it to you every time. Hello and welcome to the Hackaday Podcast. I'm Elliot Williams, Editor-in-Chief of Hackaday.
And I'm Kristina Panos, Assignments Editor at Hackaday.
This is episode 204, Cesium, Colorful Cast Buttons, and CNC Pizza. Whoo, boy, do we have a lot of news this week.
Whoo, boy.
Start off with ADSB Exchange sells up, contributors unhappy. This was a community-sourced ADSB tracker service that tracked where all of the airplanes in the world were at any given moment, and used to be kind of community contributions set in, and then the company got sold by one of its founders for $20 million, leaving everybody who gave them the data for free that was the foundation of their business bupkis. They were just a little bit pissed off. And so that's the story anyway. And we've seen kind of these free community databases sold off before. I don't know, back in the days of copying CDs to hard drives, there was CDDB, which kept all of your whatever track and song title and all that listings. And so you could just, fill them in automatically. And that service got sold and everybody got mad and then did FreeDB to show them. And it looks like everybody is going to show ADSB Exchange too. There are kind of two alternatives that show up in the comments. One is OpenSky, which looks like it kind of aims to be mostly for academics and large institutions, although it's also open. They have some weird terms of service. And then there's also globe.adsb.fi, which is completely free, completely open. And I think that's where a lot of the people who are contributing reports to ADSB Exchange have moved off to. If you're interested in this, you've probably heard about this already. And if you're interested in tracking all of the airplanes all around the world at any given moment, you should check out globe.adsb.fi. And Elon Musk, we know where you are.
Are we going to have that in the show notes?
What, do we know where Elon Musk is?
No.
Or globe, or globe.ads.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's put that in. Good idea. And the next two pieces of news are both good news. One is the radioactive source missing in Australian desert has been found. And this was an article by Lewin. It was originally going to be, where the heck is the radioactive source missing in the Australian desert? And then about an hour before publishing it, they actually found it. And Lewin rushed in there and made changes to the text. It was a Cesium-137 capsule that was used as part of an iron ore measuring machine, and apparently it would radioactive through the iron ore, and some of it would get absorbed, and you could tell how much was going through the chute by looking at that. And it came off in transport, which Lewin says absolutely should not happen.
Whoops.
You think?
Well, it literally fell off the back of a truck, as he says.
And they lost this sub-dime sized piece of extremely hot radioactive material. I love that Lewin mentions the phrase drop and run, which apparently things that are radioactive enough are labeled with drop and run. Anyway, you certainly don't want to have picked this thing up. The good news is they knew basically where it had gotten lost. I mean, they knew on which highway it had gotten lost, and apparently went along with a radiation detector slowly up the road and found it again. So no worries, everything's good. But it makes for a great story. And yeah, I'm sure somebody's head's going to roll about not using Loctite on the bolts.
Yeah, something like that.
I think it's supposed to be in some foolproof cage and things too. I think, well, we'll see. I'm not going to get sued for saying this though. And last up, Wizards Get Creative, Maybe Save the World. This is a follow-up to an article that Jonathan Bennett wrote about the open source license that the Dungeons & Dragons rules used to be under, and then the company that owns the Dungeons & Dragons franchise, Wizards of the Coast, were going to deauthorize the previous license. And the question was, can you revoke open source licenses like this? Can you force people who have previously made expansion packs based on the open rules to go back, et cetera, et cetera? there may be repercussions for this for open source software licenses because it's actually a very similar license in a way. It's kind of interesting, how much can you change open source licenses ex post? But what happened, of course, is the community went, hey, that's skeezy, and huge complaint from the D&D community. And Wizards backed off and, in fact, went the other way and released the new rule set under Creative Commons BY, which means you can do whatever the heck you want with it. All you have to do is say that this rule set is owned by Wizards of the Coast, and then anything else you want to do, you can do. And so that is a super win for open rule sets, open gaming, and kind of the creativity of the D&D world. It's fun. I actually went through and reread the rules. I don't think I've read the D&D rules since I was like 17. But it's pretty damn nostalgic.
I know them better through Magic. I've played more Magic than D&D.
My wife used to play a lot of Magic too.
Well,
I never.
You should get out more.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
All right, now it's time for What's That Sound? This is a Guess the Sound week, so I've got a fresh sound
Hooray.
set up for Kristina to guess. Give it a try, and then we'll let our audience guess along with.
Well, it sounds like a dryer to me.
Ooh, pretty good.
Or a washer.
It's got that kind of ka-chunk, ka-chunk kind of sound.
Or something in between.
That's a very good guess, but it is not what it is. Yeah, I think I won't give you any more clues.
Oh, is it a copier?
Ooh, also good. Also not.
This is a sound I would know.
I think so, yeah.
Probably.
It's a pretty common sound.
Okay.
I can't say too much more.
I got nothing.
All right. Well, those of you listeners out there, if you know what this is, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. Give us your best guess, and we'll see who got it right next week and draw for a Hackaday Podcast t-shirt.
You get a t-shirt?
Exactly. My first hack this week comes from Ben Krasnow and his YouTube channel, Applied Science. This is RF spectrometer sees inside, and I'm no expert. I'm not sure if this is a spectrometer or what. It may be instead a nuclear quadrupole resonance meter or something.
Oh, totally.
This is one of those applied science videos where there is a lot of science. It's absolutely terrifying that he can do this on kind of a very simple, I should be careful here, a easy enough to understand video and a correspondingly mostly simple build. So what he's built is a machine that hits a sample with a lot of radio frequency magnetic fields. So he builds a coil, right, that oscillates at, say, 3 and a bit megahertz. And you put your sample in this coil, you hit it with about 25 watts worth of oscillating magnetic field, and that's where the RF comes into this whole thing. The molecules inside then vibrate, and you can hear the ringing off of them, and different molecules vibrate at different frequencies. And so depending on what you have in there, it'll either vibrate resonantly with the frequency you hit it with, and you can hear it ringing afterwards, or it won't. And only some molecules do this, and it has to do with the way their electric moment versus their magnetic moment that comes from the electron spin is distributed. This is some crazy heavy physics. So that's the basic principle of operation. Ben actually explains the physics super well. What was interesting to me is that this whole device is, at the end of the day, is basically simple to make. And I think simple is in big air quotes because with all of these projects, the devil is in the details. But it's a waveform generator on his oscilloscope, putting the signal into a big old amplifier that puts out 25 watts at kind of 4 megahertz-ish, into a coil that's tuned with a capacitor, and you put the sample in the coil. You take the signal coming out of that, put it through another amplifier that has kind of 60 dB. So it's a really high sensitivity, low noise amplifier to listen to the sample or absence thereof, ringing or not. And then you plug that back into your oscilloscope. So parts included are 2 amplifiers, an oscilloscope, and then some passive components to make the rest of the circuitry work. And the craziest thing is that you're dishing out 25 watts worth of signal into this thing and then listening for a signal that comes back in like the nanowatts/picowatts range. And so the question is, how do you avoid swamping that second amplifier that wants to listen to these super tiny signals when you are slamming it with this gigantic 25 watt signal? And the solution there is actually all passive components. It's some wound toroids and tuned capacitors. It's using the ham radio people out there, you'll know this, the quarter wavelength trick, where if you have an open circuit at the end of a quarter wavelength feed line, it looks like a closed circuit, or if you have a closed circuit, it's an open circuit. And so he's shunting the loud sources out by having a pair of clamping diodes on that so that the quarter wavelength looks like a quarter wavelength only to loud circuits. On the input side, he's also worried about the 25 watt amplifier making a lot of noise even when it's off. So he wants to like attenuate that thing's little bit of noise. And so while on the top circuit, he's got some diodes that are essentially pointing to ground, clamping the circuit closed so that on the other side of the quarter wavelength, it looks like open circuit. On the high volume side, he's passing it through diodes so that only the loud circuit gets through. And when you turn the signal off, nothing gets through the diodes. So he's basically relying on diodes all over the place in this thing to make the loud sounds go away and to make the, when they need to, and to make the quiet sounds go away when they need to. It's really, really clever. Apparently, these are standard tricks of the trade. I learned something new, though, by watching it. And everything in this is like totally normal parts. These are like whatever they are, 1418 diodes. They're just the normal old diodes that you probably have on your desk right now. So really, really cool that he can make a nuclear quadrupole resonance sensor or whatever out of, kind of copper boxes and normal parts. Very, very impressive. Very cool video.
For my first hack, I chose casting custom resin buttons for the Steam Deck. Now, as we all know, the buttons on console controllers vary wildly. Of course, if you play on a PC, you don't have that problem. Anyway, and the Steam Deck is no different. So Gina Hoyska overheard her partner wishing for Steam Deck buttons that matched the Xbox color scheme. So off she went, and she must have molded the buttons while he was sleeping or something, because it sounds sounds like she did it in secret. One of the really cool parts about this is she used a food container as a vacuum degassing chamber. One of the early comments is about that, and she shows up and she's quick to say, "Oh, it's this other person's idea," and she drops a link to their stuff. I just thought that was cool. And then for the legends, she used rub-on decals, but then sealed them in with a coat of resin and a UV flashlight, so they won't wear off, or they shouldn't wear off. It would take a long time for them to wear off.
Yeah, you don't know how much people play video games.
That's true. That's true. So yeah, and the end result, I think they look fantastic. They have kind of a nice swirly sparkle going on.
Yeah, and these look like they were a super complicated part to mold. They've got all sorts of funny little features on them.
Oh yeah, all the escutcheon or skirt or whatever.
Yeah, it's got a skirt with a bunch of little
tabby things on it.
Tabby knobbies on it. Exactly.
Blah.
Yeah, right? Good luck making those. And they're all at strange angles. Man.
But here we are.
Exactly, but success. The mold looks like it's 3D printed, but then, because that's the top of the mold. So she had a 3D printed top parting plate. Cool. Oh, that's super cool. That's a cool technique. This is a fun one because it uses not just one, but 2 different 3D printing methodologies. She uses regular old FDM printing for some of the mold stuff, and then a bunch of UV resin for the finishing, like you said, and other parts. Gina's got those 3D printers on hand. She is the author and maintainer of Octoprint. So if you use Octoprint, go say hi. But also check out those sweet, sweet buttons.
Another very cool thing is that she says that until Monday, January 9th of this year, I had never before touched silicone or epoxy resin, and by Monday, January 16th, I had 4 self-cast Steam Deck buttons in my hand.
Man.
Yeah.
That's what you get. Just get out there and do it.
Do it scared.
Let me double check on Cesium. Why did I keep... It's today's Cesium day. What?
Yeah.
All right, my next hack is an atomic pendulum clock accurate enough for CERN. Daniel Valouche claims that this is the most accurate pendulum clock on the planet. He's probably right. Daniel works at CERN and has access to the Cesium fountain clock that is the basis for the SI definition of the second and contributes to UTC time. So as a time base, he's got it pretty good. This project is to take an old mechanical master clock. It's a pendulum clock that used to be a primary time source back in the day, and he's disciplining it by using the signal in his office that comes from the main SI clock. And he's doing this in a very clever way. When you think of a pendulum clock, you think of like raising and lowering that weight on the bottom of it to make it run faster or slower. In this case, he's actually got a little like catch bucket and a chain, and the chain goes up to a stepper motor that's suspended above it, and he drops more or less of this chain onto the little weight platform. It doesn't make the pendulum longer, but it changes the pendulum's like weight distribution, effectively lengthening or shortening it. So what he does is then compares the time that the clock's running at to this incredibly accurate clock source he has coming in. And if it needs to run faster, he pulls up a little chain. And if it needs to run slower, he drops a little bit down. That's a really cute way of changing the period of a mechanical clock that I'd never thought of. The cool thing about this is that it doesn't actually modify the nice old clock at all, particularly. Like, it's got a cardboard chain catcher thing, and that's it. We have another old hack, and this one from way back in 2013 that takes a similar but different approach to hacking a grandfather clock that you should absolutely check out. He puts a magnet on the pendulum and then with a servo motor raises and lowers a piece of metal closer or further away to this magnet, and that makes the pendulum swing faster because it like gets pulled down by the magnet as it goes down. And the author of that one, Keith, likes to think of the magnet as being like extra gravity under the pendulum. More gravity makes it run faster. And so he can raise or lower this little metal platform. And that's another kind of non-destructive old clock hack. Those of you out there who have old grandfather clocks thinking, how am I going to do this? Here are 2 crazy possible ways to change its pendulum non-destructively. If you've got a 3rd or a 4th or a 237th, let us know.
For my next hack, I chose self-watering planters reuse household jars. I don't know about you, but I love reusing household jars. And I love that you can still find a few things that come in glass, and that some of those things even suggest reuses for the containers. One thing they probably hadn't thought of was to create self-watering planters using 3D printing, which is what Tommy did. Tommy created a parametric design in OpenSCAD to help measure the apparently finish of jars and lids, which is what us common folk call the threads. Yeah, so the 3D printed piece screws onto the jar. It's got a bunch of holes that drilled into it for drainage and for the roots to come out. And then he's got a wick going into the water, so it wicks up the water into the soil. And yeah, it's just a very, very clever, nice looking thing, especially the pink. I don't know, I like the pink a lot. I thought it was very cool.
Like you said, everything is parametric. So you've got big plants, you can make the plant part taller. You've got whatever these screw threads are, you measure them, boom, type that in, you'll have something that fits. I think that's really, really cool. I actually need to make this because I've got all these coffee beans coming off my coffee tree plant, and they like to stay damp but not wet, especially when they're trying to sprout. And something like this would be ideal.
Do you have a humidor?
A humidor, where I keep my cigars, you mean?
Yes.
Oh, no.
Well, I mean, if you had one, you could like throw a damp paper towel in there or just raise the dampness. Or you could use like an ammo box and a wet paper towel or something.
But they need light.
Oh,
so,
yeah, well.
Yeah.
Psh, bah.
Bah.
You want them to grow.
Yeah, right? My next hack is opening a safe with a stepper motor and a DIY auto dialer. NBV apparently had a gift safe. You know how that is.
Don't look a gift safe in the...
Yeah. Dial.
Yeah.
And he didn't know the combination. And so he came at it with this entirely rough and ready hack. This is one of these like just total improvisatorial hacks. Like you could tell he's just making this up as he goes along. The bit that grabs onto the dial is actually an adjustable hole saw and a hose clamp. So he got like the hole saw bit that just kind of fit around it and tightened it down a little bit.
They make adjustable hole saws? Sorry.
Ooh, yeah. I actually have exactly the same hole saw at home.
What?
It's got a big flat part, and then you can kind of turn and slot in the different saw blades. They feel almost like they're spring steel. I'm sure they're not. But the saw blades are like thin, and you slide them into their tracks and lock them in. $8 at the hardware store for me.
Sounds dangerous.
Yeah, I cut myself every time I try to put one of the new blades in, actually.
Oh.
But not bad. I mean, just a little nick here or there. I could probably wear gloves.
Just a flesh wound.
Right, exactly. Anyway, so hole saw grabs onto the dial, and then he glues that onto a servo motor. And the whole thing is held with kind of 2020 frame. I guess it's maker beam. And some magnets onto the door. And that's about it, except for the clever code he wrote for the Arduino that turns the stepper motor. So first off, it's basically just brute forcing this dial by trying all the possible combinations. And you'd think that would take a long time. Like it's got 100 numbers on it, and you have to get the 3 numbers right. So that's 100 to the third. But it has about a 2 or 3 number imprecision to it. So he actually only has to try every other number and he'll eventually get it. So he's down to 50 to the third. And he's got yet another clever optimization here. Inside the dial, there are actually these 3 discs that you're aligning. And he keeps track of the position of the discs so that he can minimize the amount of turning he has to do for the dial, which I thought was pretty clever. He's doing it just because he can't make the stepper motor go very fast because the super glue that's holding onto the hole saw will break. So, you do what you do. But as he says, this was like an 2-hour hack, and he had to let it run for 2 days because it's going so slowly. But at the end of this 2-day period, the little bit of weight, and I think he said it was like a hose or something, he put some kind of weight on the handle to apply a little tension to it. And by the end of this 2-day period, it had opened itself and he got it open. Of course, he doesn't know what the combination is at this point, but the good news is on the inside, it has the instructions for resetting the combo. I think he could read the combo off of the disc positions because he does say that it seems like it was probably somebody's birthday.
Nice.
So next time you're brute forcing an unknown safe, try plausible birthdays first. Just, in case you're ever in this position.
Well, what was in the damn safe?
Yeah, there was nothing in the safe. This is the... Oh, man. Yeah, there was nothing in the safe.
This is that Geraldo thing all over again.
Yeah, right? But he got a safe. He could put his own
That's true.
combo in, and now he has a safe.
I need a safe. That's true.
That's its own reward. Anyway, this is kind of your reminder that no safe is really safe. All safes are basically just how long does it take to break into it. if you're sitting there for 2 days with your machine on it, I think the guys in the bank are going to notice. On the other hand, if you're doing this at home, at leisure, by all means, the Hacky Auto Dialer is the way to go.
Start on a Sunday when there's a bank holiday on Monday.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And there's your 2 days.
Boom. Boom. Ocean's 11 and a half.
Unethical life pro tips. Don't eviscerate that old computer. I just wanted to say eviscerate. For my next hack, I chose retro computer enclosure without the sacrifice. Now, we seem to be on a don't destroy it kick today, along with the Cesium. And along that line, we have Andy MT's very nice wedge case that is meant to save all those vintage computers from becoming, as Tom puts it, glorified Raspberry Pi enclosures.
Oh.
I love the keyboard that Andy MT chose because it does look very, very nice. Well, without the RGB, it looks very... I'm not against RGB. I'm just saying, without the RGB, it looks very appropriate for the case that it's in. And one of the cool things is it's not tailored to any one specific single board computer or anything. That's up to you. But that also means you have to design the internals to support that if you want and cut all the holes that you want. But that shouldn't be too hard for our audience.
I love this approach, which is just to make an entirely new retro computer to put your retro computer emulation in. Like that's awesome. That's just an extra, like half the fun of having an old Commodore is to, have that nice box in front of you. And this gives you that effect without having to suffer through actually making an old C64 work. Plus, when you get tired of the C64, you can turn it into a Tandy color computer or something.
Yeah.
Acorn A3000.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. My first quick hack this week comes from Thea Flowers. Kai Canvas helps teach and share KiCad projects in browsers. And this is an awesome looking project. It's not publicly released yet, but you can see demos. It's basically a browser-based board viewer, so you can see the Gerbers and play with the different levels, and it's completely interactive and in browser. But it also has circuit diagrams, all of them imported straight over from KiCad. The circuit diagrams, you can click on parts and look around. It looks like a fantastic way to document your circuits and their designs on the web, which of course is something Hackaday is super into. So thanks to keep hacking on this, get it done. It looks awesome. Next up, Aaron Christoffel, find SWD points quickly, no extra hardware needed. This is to find the single wire debugging points on a board you'd like to attack if you want to reprogram it or whatever. Imagine you are looking at an array of test points. Which ones are the single wire debug points? Aaron's trick here is a short Python script that wraps around his debugger and makes a normal beep if it fails to get a response to an SWD query, and it plays a nice little musical melody if it does find the SWD. This means you don't have to move your hand over and hit enter every time you want to try again for another pair of test points. You just go test, 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 test. Make short work of finding which pins have the data you want on them. And last but not least, surgery on an LED to preserve vintage aesthetics is some work by Chris Jones. He has an old amplifier that has those fun little square LEDs as the power switch and stuff like that. And one of them burned out. I love these 5x2 millimeter square LEDs, and the aesthetics alone are superb. What he does here made me laugh because he's actually sawing the LED package open, pulling the die out and putting an SMT LED inside, and then gluing the whole thing back together. And I had never thought of surface mount LEDs being like the replaceable light bulbs for through-hole LEDs before, and now I can't think of them as anything else.
My first quick hack comes from My Mechanics DIY adjustable wrench nuts. And this is totally nuts because it's totally tiny. And at first blush, I expected it to be from Yuri Tukman, but there was no bird. But no, this is from My Mechanics, and this is made from a single, I believe, a single M20 nut. The video is very engaging and mesmerizing, and it's easy to just kind of enjoy it and get lost. Up next I've got pizza making CNC machine is the only tool we've ever dreamed of. And this comes from T. Warner, and I love that Lewin slipped open source development in there. I thought that was hilarious. Should have been part of the title.
Aw.
But this is exactly what you think it is. It's a CNC machine that makes pizza. And while it doesn't do the dough, it does the sauce and the cheese for now. And it distributes them in a nice spiral pattern. I really like the way it distributes the sauce. It kind of plops it in these nice little plops, but then it goes around in a spiral. And there have been some issues with cheese clogs and things like that, but T. Warner is going to forge on for the good of mankind and turn this into the perfect pizza-making CNC machine. And finally, I have Lego Guitar is really an ultrasonically controlled synth. And this comes from the Brick Experiment channel. And I happen to be in the process of building the Lego Stratocaster, which is, it's not a very easy build, because you have to especially stringing it, and the headstock comes off, and then my headstock came apart, and so I put it away for now.
Oh my god.
Basically, I have to start over at this point. So this is really an ultrasonically controlled synth, but that's okay. So the body of the guitar is a Mindstorms EV3, and it's also the brain. And you play it by sliding this piece up and down the Lego fretboard, and the EV3 detects where the slide is with an ultrasonic sensor to determine which of the colorful frets you're trying to play. And then you press one of the EB3 buttons to pluck the string. It seems like a difficult instrument to play, but it does seem like also a fun mechanism. And having, just recently become a slide player myself, I can sympathize with the difficulty of sliding. It looks very fun, and I might have to make one. I think we have some Mindstorm stuff around here.
Oh, cool.
That my husband brought to the table.
All right, that brings us to the Can't Miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday staff writers. This week, I'm choosing Maya Pasha's Detecting Machine-Generated Content, an Easier Task for Machine or Human? ? And that is a neat question. With all the recent hubbub about ChatGPT, I know that teachers have been worried about their students submitting papers written by AIs. And a lot of people are wringing their hands about artificial disinformation. And so it's interesting to think about, as these chatbots get smarter and smarter, will we be able to tell text generated by these machines apart from text generated by people? And of course, this is also the Turing test question at its heart. And the answer from a bunch of these research papers, although all of them predate the most recent GPT 3.5 that's at the basis of ChatGPT, all these were done on GPT-2 or GPT-3, but these research papers all seem to say yes. And even weirder, it's easier to build a machine algorithm that tells what is and what isn't machine text than it is to train people to do it. And I don't know if I believe that conclusion yet, but it's what I think is neat about this is that all of these papers kind of hone in on something that I've noticed in a lot of this machine-generated text, which is that it's very bland, it's very boring, and that's because it's kind of always picking the most likely combination of words. And so it never says anything interesting. And when you read human text, we tend to write boring stuff, and then something cool, and we don't repeat the same word over and over again just because it's the most frequently used word. In fact, we avoid it. We find synonyms for these words to not say the same word 6 times in a row. And the machines don't do this. what all of these researchers are essentially doing is taking the kind of how would an artificial text generation routine generate this text, and then looking at the text itself and saying, how probable is this? And is this something that a machine would have put out? And then ranking them based on the kind of, would an AI say this probabilities? And it's fun because when they do this, they get kind of 90% down to 80% accuracy, whereas the people doing it are down around 70%, sometimes as low as 60%. And so the machines are doing better. I think one of the reasons that is, though, is because the researchers have trained the machines to know what the machine's text looks like, and the kind of average person on the street hasn't read a bunch of AI text yet. And I think we haven't figured out kind of how boring the AI-generated text is. But once you tell people that, I wonder if that'll help us also increase our scores on these tests. Anywho, if you have some text and you want to figure out if it is AI generated or not, one thing that all of these academic papers hint at is that if it's kind of boring and or repetitive and or uses high probability words, it could be that it's an AI generating your text.
For my can't miss article, I chose Lewin's What Losing Everything Taught Me About Backing Up. Now, poor Lewin was burgled and lost pretty much everything electronic that they could carry except his TV, which apparently was too big. I mean, we're talking computers, laptops, guitars, probably loose hard drives, maybe.
Apparently.
And he starts off with his alibi, with his what I've been doing instead of backing my things up. And I found myself nodding along at all the reasons not to have been doing it. That sounds like me. And he talks about how you should obey the 3-2-1 rule, which is you should have 3 copies, 2 of them kept locally, and 1 of them kept off-site, 3-2-1. In reviewing this loss of 2 laptops, 2 desktops, loose hard drives, phones, what have you, he realized that it wasn't totally for naught. There were some cloud backups, and despite having to rebuild a bunch of tools that he uses to output 1,000 articles a year, he managed to get going again fairly quickly on an old borrowed laptop and realize exactly what he really needs to have around. And it's all, none of it's not precious, but there are things that make it easier, like stuff is still up on YouTube, even though the source videos are gone. Like it lives on YouTube. You can download it from YouTube, stuff like that. So yeah, it's a good lesson for us all. And it sucks that it had to happen to him.
Yep. Yeah, when you say nodding along, I was totally nodding along. And one of the hardest parts in making a backup plan is just going through all of your data and figuring out what's worth backing up and what's not. And he says that he didn't do it because he had, however many terabytes of data, and it was just too expensive to archive it all. Because he didn't archive the important stuff out of that, he just didn't archive any of it. And that is kind of, that lesson cuts a little bit deep here. Like, yeah, it's hard just to figure out what the important stuff is and what's worth backing up and what's not, and what you could survive with if everything disappeared and what's not. And we made some headway into that here at our house, and we decided all the pictures are worth backing up. The pictures, the tax stuff, my writings and my projects are too. And man, I feel for Lewin. They didn't steal his robot, which had on it the only copy of the robot code he had left was like on the SD card in the bot. If they had snagged that, as he says, some total of hundreds of hours of engineering effort would have been lost, and that would have taken months, and he probably wouldn't have even just done it. Good for him that he had a copy there. I mean, this is one of those events, like getting thieves come into your house and steal all your crap is the one that I'm really not safe against here. Like my backup drives they're on the desk that my computer's underneath. If they came up here to the office and started snagging stuff and they took my backups, I would be doomed. House burns down or we get burgled. Boom, that's it, right? I have the code I've pushed up to GitHub, and what else do I have? Yikes. If I think of all the things that probably will go wrong with my data, and that is that the hard drives will fail, or I think a house fire is probably on the way outside of the realm of possibility for us. I think it's more likely that I would just lose shit, or, we'll get hit by lightning and my hard drive will get zapped or something. So I guess I'm not too worried about not having offsite, but having read Lewin's story makes me a little bit worried still.
But you don't use Dropbox or anything?
We have some stuff up on Dropbox. My wife sends her photos. She puts her photos up on Dropbox. I have too many to do that with. I have terabytes of photos.
Jeez.
Like Lewin, I'm not paying to put that up on Dropbox.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
Yeah. He had kept like all of his old raw video stuff for videos he's since edited and posted somewhere. I kind of draw the line somewhere. That stuff I tend to delete as soon as I'm done with it and then just keep the finished product. But again, that's the hard part. That's the part that's actual work, and no automated backup program in the world can take care of, except the simple just back everything up. But then that's too expensive. I feel for him. Do you guys have centralized backup?
No, just Dropbox.
Yeah.
I should, though.
I mean, just Dropbox is probably good enough if the important stuff is there too, right?
Pretty much everything's on there.
Yeah, see, you're pretty much good then.
Or it's still on my old phones, which isn't great. But
yeah, that's a little scarier, but I don't know if I've made my peace with the cloud yet.
Old man yells at cloud.
Yells at cloud, exactly. That wraps it up for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks a lot for listening. If you'd like to follow along with the links or leave comments, head on over to the show notes, hackaday.com/podcast. And if you see anything cool or do anything cool, write us an email, tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
keep on hacking.
Your background noise comes and goes.
Oh dear.
I think it's you moving, actually. I think your microphone is super sensitive.
Oh, yeah, I do have a tool skirt on.
It's not automatic gain control, it's tool.
New rule, no tool.
A Cesium capsule. Was it Cesium? Cesium, yeah, rock and roll.
For my long boy, what do we call these?
Can't miss article.
That's the one.
What episode was this?